Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our final session of today for Let's Learn Live Virtual Summit. My name is Caitlin Oswald with Columbus, and today we have a special presentation for you on covering some GP tips and tricks. Next slide, Tiffany. Just wanted to remind everyone that on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see your dashboard, and we have included in the handout section area where you can download the slides of today's presentation. You can download them, have access to them for you to reference, to take notes on during the presentation, or just to kind of refer to after the webinar has concluded as well. As a side note, we are recording this webinar and we'll be sharing this recording with everyone in our follow-up emails following the event. So that way, if you want to kind of revisit the session itself with the audio and visual all together, then you can certainly do that. Also on the right-hand side of your screen is our questions box. We welcome you to ask any questions throughout the session. If you just want to click over there, enter a question, and then throughout, we'll have kind of a Q&A at the end of today's webinar with our presenter where we'll be covering all questions that were submitted. And now I'm excited to pass over the reins to our presenter today, Tiffany Fluss. Tiffany, it's all yours.
Thanks, Caitlin. So welcome, everyone. Just a quick overview of what we'll be covering today in our tips and tricks session. As I go through the presentation deck, I'll be flipping over into a GP virtual image that I've set up to walk through some of these in real time. As Caitlin mentioned, if you have any questions that you would like me to recover at the end of the session, go ahead and plug that into our question box and we'll cover it at that time. So from an agenda perspective, we're going to start with some of our user-specific tips and tricks. Then we're going to flow into reporting tips and tricks. And I have some module-specific, so things for inventory, sales, purchasing, and financial. And then finally, we're going to conclude with one of the big ones, the workflow-specific tips and tricks. In this area, I'll actually demo a quick workflow so you can see how it works in real time. That said, go ahead and get going. So for our first tip and trick of the day, we have something called our workflow, or our homepage in the industry. So what this is, if you're not using your homepage to your fullest advantage, I'm going to show you real quickly how you can cover that in just a second. So when you first log into Dynamics GP, and this may have been a while for some users, you might have seen something like on the right-hand side of my slide deck, where it's saying, welcome to Microsoft Dynamics GP, choose your industry and appropriate role. What this does is, based upon the role that you select, GP will predefine onto your homepage some smart lists that you might reference as an example for that particular role, maybe using some GP out-of-the-box reports and some additional quick links. From there, you can go in and customize that particular view, if you will, on your homepage to make it more specific and user-friendly to you. So I'm going to jump over to my virtual image here and show you what this looks like in real time. So over here in Dynamics GP, I'm on my homepage, and I'm going to click on Customize this page. And as you can see, I've already predefined an industry role, so it's already pre-populated some of those reports and quick links that I mentioned. But let's say I want to change or modify that, or even reference it. It's been a while since I've created my user profile, so I want to update and take advantage of this tip. I'm going to click on Change Role. And at this point in time, you're going to get presented with that same message or box that you saw in my slide deck. Indicates the industry as well as the appropriate role. Like I said, that GP has designated or made some assumptions on. So as an example, that accounting manager role, you can see over here, it provides you a brief little description of what that task or role might include. And then subsequently, it would give you those, like I mentioned before, some of those reports and quick links, et cetera, that you would have access to. So I'm going to go ahead and close this down and I'll move over to my next tip. So again, this is also a user-specific tip. I should step back and say what I mean by user-specific. So if I go in and make any modifications, as I just showed you, to the home page, or even as I jump into some user preferences that I'm going to go into now, these are all going to be unique to myself. So if I make those changes and then my colleague makes the change, they're going to be different across the board. So kind of keep that in mind as I'm going through these user-specific ones. So for this one, setting up my user preferences, great example of my user preferences. As an example, let's say you're in a payables transaction entry screen and you know that GP requires certain elements such as like the vendor ID, the dollar amount, and then maybe a common one that I see getting forgotten at times would be that document number. So as a trick, to make those fields much more prevalent, so let's say you want to bold them or turn them to a different color so that you remember as a cue that when you're in those windows, those are required fields that GP wants us to enter data for. This is where you can come in to set up your user preferences to indicate that. So I'm going to flip back over to my virtual image to show you what that looks like. So I'm going to go to Microsoft Dynamics GP, User Preferences. And then similar to that slide deck, you're going to see a couple things that you can define in that user preference screen as options. I'm going to focus on the display that I was just describing. So again, that's really going into the individual windows and changing those font settings so that it's much more prevalent so I can quickly identify what GPUs require me to enter so I don't miss it and save myself some keystrokes. So I'm going to click on Display, and it's going to open up my User Display Preferences window. And here you can see where there's links to fields, so if we're going to do any drill backs, predefined, you'll see blue, but let's say I have a preference of turning it to yellow teal, so you can see you have various color arrangements to meet your needs and desires on that one. Similarly, under the font style, you can also change that to be underline or regular. Again, these are all just cues for yourself to help you remind either drill back or over here on the required fields, I can change it to black or red. And once I set up those user preferences to my liking, I would just go ahead and hit apply, and then that's going to change that to the various windows within the application. Additionally, there's some other things in here. So if you were a person that's using sales on a more frequent basis than others, you can see there's a way to default the sales doc type. So if I'm in my sales transaction entry screen, and I'm primarily responsible for entering in orders, not quotes, I can change this to order so that when I'm in that sales transaction entry screen, it's going to pre-populate to the doc type of order. Save myself some clicks there as well. I'm going to go ahead and close this down. And then I'm going to move over to our third tip that's user specific. And that's keyboard shortcuts. So if you find yourself, I know I've run across this several times with customers, that they'll ask me, I'm a keyboard shortcut person. So I like to use my keyboard frequently. I like to be able to hit F4, for example, and I want to be able to see my general transaction entry screen. Well, GP allows you to do that, and I'm going to show you here real quickly how you can do that. Going back into my virtual image. And pretty simple to use. So what I'm going to do is on my home page, I'm going to right click here, click add window. And that's going to populate my add window shortcut section. Here I can name whatever I want it to be. So like I said, maybe I'm an accounting manager and I'm primarily responsible for approving GL batches, right? And so I want to be able to, on my keyboard, hit F4 and to pull up the GL batch entry screen. So I'm going to go ahead and name that. So it's user specific to me. I can name it whatever I want. And then next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and find that respected window or portion of the application. So I'm going to scroll into, since I know I'm looking for the GL batch entry screen, I'm going to go into Microsoft Dynamics GP, Financial, and I'm going to go and locate batch entry. Now at this point in time, I can elect to just simply add that window shortcut to my navigation pane over here on the left-hand side, or I can take it one step further and add a keyboard shortcut to it. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the drop-down. Now it is keeping track of, so let's say I've gone in and created a previous shortcut, it is keeping track of those. So just as a reference point, so you don't have to remember, oh gosh, what did I use F2, for example, for? Or is that something that I've already used in another shortcut? As you can see, it takes that off the list as available options for you. So I like F4 for this particular preference. So I'm going to go ahead and click that and select Add. And then I'm going to go ahead and say Done. So now over here on, just to recap what we've done now, over here on my navigation pane, so on the left-hand side of my screen, I'll see a GL batch entry screen. So I could choose to either click that, or I know you can't see my screen, but I'm hitting F4 on my keyboard, and that's pulling up my batch entry window. So I'm going to go ahead and close this one down, and I'm going to move on to my next user-specific tip, which is tip number 4. And that's going to be taking our homepage. If you recall, when I started this presentation, I showed you how you can customize your homepage by adding in GP's predefined reports, quick links, etc., based upon the role that you've selected in that section. Well, I'm actually now going to take that one step further and point out some other areas that you can customize your homepage that will really help you out on your day-to-day basis. So to navigate that, I'm going to go back to my user image. And you can see here, I've gone in and modified this a little bit to where it makes sense. But for some users, they might not be interested in seeing, as an example, the procurement dashboard. So what I did is I clicked on Customize this page. Let me go ahead and maximize that a little bit so you can see it a little better. So you can see various panels that I can add to this home page. So to start, if you're not familiar with what to-dos are, just at a real high level, it's a great way to manage things like if you want to take your smart list one step further of, let's say as an example, you have a couple smart lists out there that maybe you use for certain purposes to, if you're on the customer accounts receivable side, you're using that smart list maybe daily or weekly to reference what's outstanding or doing inquiries on our customers. But let's say you want to take that one step further and add that smart list to your homepage in the form of what we would call a reminder. This is where you would start. So you would start by adding onto your homepage the to-do section. And then if I click on this blue expansion arrow here, you'll see there's a couple things that I can add in addition to what that to-do reminder section would be. So I can add those reminders, and we'll get into what that looks like for smart lists when I move over into the reporting section. But just keep in mind what that's doing. Like I said, if you want to take your smart list one step farther and add it to your homepage in the form of a reminder, this is where you're going to add that. Additionally, you'll see things like GP tasks. A great example of this, I was working with a customer and they wanted to be able to take their month-end close processes and add them within the application. So as an example, they had, which is probably very true for some of the folks on the line, they had an Excel spreadsheet sitting somewhere where they were keeping track of specific duties as part of the close process. But they wanted to track that in GP. So they were using tasks to leverage that, to keep track of it. And so pretty simple to add. Again, come into my to-do section, click on that blue expansion arrow that you just saw, mark tasks. And if I click on that blue expansion arrow here, very similar to if I was going to use an Outlook-based application, I would click on New Tasks, plug in the case of the example that I provided, the customer put in what that specific task was. So for them, it was reviewing general ledger batches at the end of the month and then running the reconcile utility within GP. So they labeled that as the task description. And then to help that user out that task was assigned to, they put in a link to the actual window within the application. Go ahead and close that down. Close this down. And then the other thing that you saw under that to-do section, so you can see there's a lot of content, of course, the workflow task and notifications. So when I get back into my workflow, which we'll be talking at the later end of the presentation, we'll circle back to this and how you can leverage that to your homepage as well. That's to do. Under quick links, this is an area that I also help a lot of our customers with. They find themselves when they're navigating within the application, they find themselves only going to like 5 or 6 windows. That's it. So they want to be able to save themselves some time and save themselves some clicks. That's where quick links come into play. Very similar to how we would add a to-do, very easy to use, or how I would have added a keyboard shortcut. I'd click on my quick link details, hit add, GP window. So let's say I'm going to go back to my GL batch entry screen, right? As an example, I want to add that to my quick links. So I would go under transactions, financial, batches, select OK, and select OK one more time, and OK, close that down. And this is a one-time setup, so once you set this up, you won't have to click all as much as I just did. And go ahead and hit that refresh bar. I'm going to drag this up so we can see it a little bit better. And so you can see there's my batches. So I can go ahead and click on that, and it'll take me directly to that batch entry screen. Couple other things that I would like to show you on the user-specific customizing our homepage before we move on. Another common one that I see folks adding once they find out how to use this tool is the My Report section. So just so I can click on that blue expansion arrow here, this is going to populate all of the reports within the application, whether you've created them or they've been made available for other users that you can add to your homepage. Again, the benefit there is maybe I'm running a trial balance report, save myself 4 or 5 clicks at the end of the month, just go ahead to my homepage, click reports, and boom, off it goes. Go ahead and close this down. And then finally, we have some other things. If you're using project time and expense, that's available for you to add, as well as any business analyzer reports that you'd be using within the application. I'm not going to cover those, but as you can see, they are available to you. Additionally, again, this is user specific as well. If you wanted to change the column layout, so currently I have it as a 2 columns, so I'm dragging and dropping the respective areas to the forefront so I can see it. But maybe I prefer just a 1 column or 3 columns. That's available to you as well. I'm going to go ahead and close this. And then I'm going to move on to my 5th user-specific trick. I'm sorry, actually, going to my reporting tips and tricks. So under Smart Lists and reminders, so as you recall, as I was talking about the home page and being able to leverage that to-do section or the reminder section of my home page and how it's incorporated with Smart Lists, this is how you do it. So I'm going to flip over to my virtual image again one more time. Couple ways, of course, to navigate to Smart Lists. You could have added an icon or or a bookmark, which some people I see that happen a lot as well. But I'm just going to go the standard way. So I'm going to go to Microsoft Dynamics GP, Smart List. And I'm going to pick on purchasing here. So I'm sitting in accounts payable, and I am primarily responsible for a particular vendor within our Rolodex. And I want to maintain or have some visibility in terms of what's outstanding and ready for payment. So I'm going to leverage a smart list, and then I want to be reminded whenever there are a certain amount of transactions or if it's over a dollar limit for that particular vendor. So to do that, I'm going to go under Payables Transactions. And I'm going to click on the Invoices by Vendor, so the out-of-the-box one that GP's already provided. And I'm going to modify this a little bit to meet my needs, and then I'm going to add that reminder. So I'm primarily responsible in my role to look at a travel company. So to do that, I'm going to add a search parameter. So I'm going to click on Search. And then I'm going to click under my column name here. And I'm going to locate vendor. Let's do vendor name. And then I'm going to go ahead and type that vendor name in here. Select OK. And then I just want to make sure that the data is populating as I expect. And it looks like it is. So now at this time, I'm going to go ahead and add that particular smart list as a favorite. So I'm going to click on Favorites. And then I'm going to label this accordingly. And I'm going to make this one available only to myself, which means that it's going to be available across any companies that I have access to. Similarly, in just a moment, if it was on my home page as a preference, then when I logged in and out of those various companies, then I would see this respective smart list. So I'm going to click Add. And rather than just hitting Add Favorite and then going off and doing what I need to do, I'm going to go ahead and click Add Favorite and Reminder. And in this particular case, I want to be reminded when, just as an example, when the number of records in this section is greater than 0. But of course, I have the other options available to me. So I can look at the total comment column. So I can look at either the document amount or the current transaction amount. And if that's over a certain threshold, I can plug that in as well. So you have two different options when it comes to defining your custom reminders. Again, I'm going to choose to say that if it's greater than 0, so if this populated list has more than 0 records, it's going to show up on my home page. So I'm going to go ahead and select OK, and then close this down. And let's take a look at what it's going to show up on my home page. So I'm going to maximize this. So you can see here's my invoices by vendor, a travel company. And in brackets, I have 13 available documents in that smart list. Well, now I want to go ahead and take a deeper dive. What are those 13 documents? I'm going to go ahead and click on it one time, and it's going to take me directly back to that smart list that we were just looking at. You can see the added benefit. I'm not having to go to Microsoft Dynamics GP, smart list, and then scrolling down into that Payables transaction folder and then locating that smart list. It's right there on my home page. I'm going to close this down. I'm going to move on to my next reporting tip relative to smart lists, and that's password protecting our smart list out of the box favorites. What I mean by this is, so as you can see, this is a new feature as of GP 2016 R2. It gives you the ability to put a password protection on any smart list. As experienced, I've run across situations with customers where they're leveraging those out of the box, so those ones that have an asterisk on them. They're leveraging those reports for various reasons, but then somebody is like, hey, I want to go and modify that. Well, what ends up happening is they modify it, and now suddenly that user that they weren't aware of now is kind of at a loss because that report is no longer available or they've modified it. So that's where I'm putting a password protection to it. that kind of gives you that added benefit of controlling who can modify those reports when and where. So I'm going to show you what that looks like here. Go back into Dynamics GP. So I'm going to click on Microsoft Dynamics GP, Tools, Setup, System, Smart List Options, all the way down at the bottom of my screen. And here I'm going to apply just this generic password protect. Now I will note that this is system specific. So what that means is for the account category of accounts, customers, vendors, inventory, all of those smart list favorites that you've checked in this section would need this particular password or system password to be able to go in and modify it. And as you can see, let me go back to accounts. So if I expand this a little bit, here's going to be all the various fields, if you will, within that account section. So if anyone goes and modifies it, they would be presented with a password. So I'm going to show you what that looks like after you've put this in place. So you've put that password in place. Now I'm going to go into Microsoft Dynamics GP Smart List. Financial, go into accounts, I'm going to click on the asterisks here. Actually, let me pick another one. Let's go into account transactions, current financial journal. And let's say I've gone in and I don't necessarily, as a particular user, I don't want to see who posted, right? So I would remove that. And then I would say, no, I want to save this as my own favorite. I would say modify. Now at this point in time, because I put that password protection as an option during my setup, I'm going to be presented with this system password. So whoever has the system password, they can go in and play it. But typically the users that would come in and modify it wouldn't have access. So they would be presented with this message and kind of their alert to, if you want to save this, just rename it to something else that's user specific to you. Don't override our current financial journal. I'm going to go ahead and cancel that. And close this down. And then we're going to move on to our next reporting tip, which is reporting tip number 7. So just at a high level, I'm not going to go back into Dynamics GP and show this one, but if you are users that are doing, which is very common, especially in month-end close process, we've reconciled a specific account and now we're off by a couple $100, hopefully not more than that. But now we need to go hunt that transaction down and figure out what happened to it. This is where using your smart list and adding in that search type of one or more to be able to find that specific dollar amount can come in handy. Really simple to use. So if I'm in my smart list and I'm in my search icon, you'll see here down under search type, there's a drop down. If you want, select match one or more, and you plugged in, if you're looking for debits or credits, select OK, it'll populate the list accordingly based upon those parameters. Moving on to our reporting tip number 8. For folks that are on the line that are using Management Reporter, this is just a quick little trick. You can actually add, as of 2016, you can add your Management Reporter reports directly into GP. So, of course, as you can see on my slide deck, imagine just how much easier that's going to be, saving yourself some time, clicks, of course, and hunting and pecking to find the right reports. It's all going to be within the application for you. Moving on to reporting tip number 9, something called Smart List Company Export Solutions. So I'm going to go back into Dynamics GP and show you what this is. Essentially, the way I like to describe this to customers that I've helped implement this in the past is you find yourself using Smart Lists quite frequently to do something that all accountants, in my experience, love, is put it in Excel so that we can use some pivot tables and do some additional data analysis. And of course, as a user that's currently doing that process, you know that that takes time. And my personality is I like to work smarter, not harder. And so that's where this tip can come into handy for you. It's called Export Solutions. So I'm going to go back into Dynamics GP and just show you what this looks like as an example. Going back into Dynamics GP, I'm going to click on Smart List. So I have a pre-populated example in there. That just means that I've gone in and recorded a macro. So it does leverage a macro. Basically what a macro is, for folks that are on the line that are not familiar with what a macro is, just think of it as somebody going in and recording those various keystrokes that you took to create your pivot table. So after you recorded that as a macro and save that as a template, you can now go into your Smart List. So I'm leveraging under purchasing, receiving line items. And I wanted to use a shipment received but not invoiced report. So I'm going to go ahead and click that. So up here on the ribbon, you'll notice there's a drop down. I'm going to click on Smart List. Down right here is called Export Solutions. So again, a little bit of pre-work needs to be done, but not really complicated. If this is something you're interested in, feel free to reach out. Happy to go through this more in depth with you. So that pre-work, like I said, was recording that macro and then saving it. I would recommend saving it to a location that all users can have access to. So typically, I recommend doing it to like a GP shared. So that way that if we're going to make this list available for other users to use, they're not going to get popped up with a warning saying that it can't, that the Smart List can't access that saved macro. So that's where you're going to put in that document, and then you want to just label your macro. It could be whatever you want, but just keep that macro name and jot it down or of some sort, or reference it back when you're done, because you'll need that as a data element when you're setting up the template. And then finally, I would go down and now select the appropriate Smart List that I want to apply this macro to. So I've got a lot of content in my environment, but I would scroll down under Purchasing Requisition Line Items. Sorry about that. Under Receiving Line Items, got a little ahead of myself. And I would click on Shipment Received Not Invoiced, which is basically just saying that for this particular template or macro that I've created, I want to be able to apply that recording, for lack of a better word, to this Smart List. So when I hit deploy to Excel, it's going to populate the data as well as run and create that pivot table. Or you could also include, just as a side note, any like graphs or charts that you're, obviously you've created that pivot table and for a purpose, so you probably have a graph or a chart within that Excel workbook. Your macro can record all of that. So after I've selected the appropriate Smart List that I want to apply the macro or recording to, I'm going to go ahead and hit save. Close that down. So what's going to happen, that's going to be a little new in comparison to previous Smart List. If you were using the Excel function, you'll see that there's now a drop down. So on that drop down, what you'll find is that top one. So this is the name of that Export Solutions, dollars not invoiced. And then down here is the quick export. So basically what the difference between the two, this would be my data extract with the pivot table, or if I had graphs with that information, or if I just wanted to do a quick data dump, I can do that as well. So just so you can see what happens. So it's going to export it like it normally would as a Smart List. As you can see, it's kind of running, doing a little work in the background. I'm going to minimize this one and maximize my Excel. So to explain in depth, so here's my pivot table, very simple in nature. But like I said, you can include As long as you record that as part of your macro, you can include pivot tables and graphs as well, and maybe getting a little bit more complex with your particular export. So that would be sheet 1. And then sheet 2 is going to just be this straight data dump from Dynamics GP. So I'm going to go ahead and close this down. And we're going to move on to our next reporting tip. And that's going to be, this is a new feature within 2016 that if you have recently upgraded and you are not taking advantage of this feature, I would highly jot this down, especially for folks that are using or principally in charge for purchasing or sales transactions. What this is called our all-in-one reporting, inquiries for purchasing and sales. You can access it within various avenues, which I'm just going to show you here in a moment, within the application. And I'm just going to focus on purchasing really quickly here. So under my purchasing section, I'll click expand on my inquiry. And you can see here, this is where I'll find the purchasing all-in-one view. Again, a great feature because it's going to allow you to see all the transactions in this particular case. If I select on a travel company, I can see all the various purchase orders that were ever reported for this particular vendor, as well as invoices and subsequently any payments. A nice thing about it, of course, is because it's all in one view, I can do other navigation type things, such as selecting the invoice, and then that would filter out the appropriate purchase order that it was related to. Close that down. Go on to my next reporting tip, which is something called Excel refreshable reports. The nice thing about Excel refreshable reports is you do not have to be a GP user to use them. Once deployed, you could actually, and I'll show you here in just a second, you can actually deploy these reports as like a folder location to other non-GP users so that they can pull the data from Dynamics GP. They wouldn't be able to, of course, write back to GP. They're just seeing an inquiry. Go back into Dynamics GP. Just as an example, I'll show you first how you access them if you are a GP user, and then how you can deploy those types of reports for your non-GP users. So over here on my navigation pane, I have something called Excel reports. I'll go ahead and click on that. And you can see here, here's all the various reports. If I double click on that, I'll pull up my Excel refreshable data. If I minimize this screen, and just as an example, no, looking at your image over on my side, I don't think that you guys are seeing it quite right, but suffice to say, you could have a folder and then individuals can see that long laundry list of reports, and they could just click on it and boom, off you go with Excel. I'm going to move on to my next couple of tips. For now, at this point, at this stage, I'm just going to walk through the slide deck just so you can kind of see some of these tips and tricks. But again, if you have any questions, we can go back and look at them within the application. So the next one, moving into our module specific. So this is a great new feature, came out in 2015, R2. Essentially, there's an option now to automatically post cash receipt deposits. So what that means for folks that are not familiar with what that is, let's say you're recording cash receipts for sales invoices. typically it'd be a two-step process. You would go into that screen, record the receipt of funds, and then you would go into your bank deposit entry screen and deposit those funds into bank rec. Well, with this feature turned on, it actually is saving you that final step that I just described, which is going into bank rec and then posting the deposit. It's actually going to take those cash receipts and then once posted, we'll flow those transactions into the bank reconciliation module. Our next module-specific tips and tricks is putting customer limits and indicators. So great use of this. Let's say we're in our sales transaction entry screen, and I know some folks have it turned on where there's a pop-up warning that indicates whether or not this customer is over their credit limit. But oftentimes, what ends up happening from my experience is that they've entered in a lot of data into those transactions, and then when they're ready to post, that's when they're getting that reminder, which oftentimes is a little too late. So what this is doing is giving you that warning in advance. So as soon as I pull up that customer ID onto that transaction entry screen, I can see that little icon, and that can be my alert to say, oh, this customer is currently over the limit. Let me go and investigate before I initiate additional sales transactions for them. To turn this on, as you can see here, you'll go into sales setup receivables, and then you're going to want to make sure that you're marking the display over credit icon checkbox, as well as I just like to also mark the warn if the customer is over the credit limit. What that second one does is, as I mentioned, they've plugged in all the data. They get that secondary pop-up that indicates this customer is over their credit limit. Module specific number 14. So if you're doing any inventory management within the application, there's a way now to keep site and item relationships in the system for quite simply the historical transaction analysis that you would need. But at the same time, giving you that added benefit of looking through historical transactions, it still prevents users from posting to those sites. To do that, you can either go, as you can see, you'll go into inventory setup, site maintenance, or the quantity maintenance, and then you're going to want to select inactive. Next slide. So module specific number 15, payables credit card payments. So this is a new feature. As of 2016, there's an option to be able to use credit card payments to be able to process as part of your payment run. Really handy. Of course, we're seeing more and more customers switching over to paying or using a corporate credit card for those added benefits we have on our slide deck for points for vacation, things of that nature. So this feature definitely comes in handy when it comes to processing those payments. So you don't have to use that manual payment screen that you were using before. Prepayments on purchase orders. So this is a great little one too as well. It's helped several customers. Previously, we've had that pain point in previous versions where they want to be able to indicate a prepayment on the purchase order, but they weren't able to do so, and so they had various workarounds within the application to accommodate that. Well, now with 2016 and above, if you go into your purchasing setup purchase order processing window within the application and mark the following settings right down in here, what that's going to allow you to do is when you're processing that purchase order, you'll see over here on that right-hand side a prepayment option for you to be able to indicate that prepayment for that purchase order. Moving right along to another module specific as it relates to purchasing. That's something called our historical R&I, or historical received not invoiced report. So this is through SSRS. I'll move over to the application real quick so you can see what that looks like. Essentially, there's a lot of, as a sidebar, a lot of SSRS reports that I've even encouraged my customers when I'm working with, pointing them out, because we get a common request when you're trying to look at GP out-of-the-box reports. How do I export this out to Excel? SSRS reports can handle that pretty easily. So I'm going to show you how you can navigate to them. I'm going to go back into GP here. So I'm in my financial section, but if I were to go in sales, purchasing, the navigation is going to be the same. So what you're going to be looking for, and again, as an additional sideboard, these would need to be deployed. So if they're not deployed, definitely reach out to us and we can assist you with that process. But once deployed, there are several out-of-the-box ones. We are focusing our attention today on that historical R&I, but there are others. Actually, let me go to purchasing really quick. So I'm clicking again on Reporting Services Reports. And here's my historical R&I, or historical received, not invoiced. Give this a moment to load. All right, so once loaded, you can see if I knew what the purchase order was or a vendor, I can plug in that information and then hit View Report. But I wanted to show you as well that common request that I mentioned about pulling it to like a CSV or something where I can export this into Excel. So that's where this comes in handy. When I hit save, you can see I have all these various options for me to be able to leverage my SSRS reports for that. I'm going to close this down, go back to my slide deck. So another module specific, multi-AP distributions by default. This is, as my slide deck is indicating, a great way to put in some pre-populated GL accounts for various vendors. Keep in mind that while I'm focusing on the vendor maintenance card, this same process you can apply to your vendor classes or even customer classes, and then applying or rolling those changes down to the appropriate vendors. But what this little tip is saying is, let's say your AP clerk is frequently coding to multiple GL account numbers, and of course that can lead to some data entry errors. So this is a great way to pre-default them, and then that way we're just putting the onus on our AP clerk to validate and make any updates where appropriate. So moving into some of our financial or module specific. So this is another new feature. If you haven't upgraded, this came out in 2015 R2. Previously, in versions before that, you'd have to navigate to 2 different windows within the application to be able to see like GL account inquiries from an open or historical perspective. They're actually now all in one window. So you would go into your summary inquiry, and then you're simply selecting the appropriate fiscal year that you want to look at. This is a great feature, especially from a control perspective. This is allow control entry. This is one of those features where people see it. Like if you went into your account maintenance window, you would see this on a pretty frequent basis, but not necessarily know what that's used for. So at a high level, this is what it's used for. Provides you the ability to prevent your GP users from making manual entries to your control account. AP, cash, meaning if they tried to go and plug in a GL entry into your financial transactions journal entry, they wouldn't be able to do that if you unmark that. Another module specific, checkbook balance inquiry. Just like to point out that oftentimes users that are in here, they find some slowness into it. So just a quick tip to this. If you plug in the date ranges first and then plug in the checkbook account, it tends to run a little bit faster. Doc attach, so scanning multiple images. This feature, when it came out in 2016, got rave reviews because people were now having the ability to, within GP, scan images and then be able to associate them to appropriate documents. Well, this little tip basically is saying that if you have a scanner directly connected to the machine that you're going to be scanning documents to, you can save yourself a couple of clicks by basically scanning, hit that scan button, and then it will take that image. Again, that printer has to be connected to it. It will take all those images and plug them right into your doc attach maintenance screen versus you scanning the image, putting it to a folder location, and then having to go back after the fact and attach it to the appropriate window in GP. Moving into some like system admin features, sending users a specific message. This is a great feature, especially when it comes to year-end close time. We have to kick people out so we can take backups and run through that utility. This is basically allowing your system admin to go in and for all those GP users, rather than picking up the phone or sending multiple emails, we can send that last final reminder to any GP user that's currently logged in, hey, log out by 4:30 as an example that I have here. This is a great one that I like to touch on, especially as it when it transitions into workflow here in just a second. Being able to copy home pages and area pages. So recently I ran into an example where we were setting up requisition users within the application. And what we wanted to do was set up that all of our requisition users the same. So we wanted their home page to look exactly identical. We wanted all those quick links that we've predefined for that requisition user, all the same across the 15 users we were setting up. Well, that's where this feature came into play. It allowed us to set up that one template user, and then we could copy those same settings for that template user across those other 15 remaining users to ensure, as you can see over here on the right-hand side, that their homepage and homepage content matched identically across the board. All right, in the last couple minutes that I've got here, before we take some questions, I want to talk a little bit about workflow. I know this is a big topic, especially for folks that have upgraded since 2013. It's one of those features that, in my opinion, has enhanced over its initial release. So when it initially released, as you can see here on the screen, there were 4 available windows, if you will, within GP that you can enable this on. Since then, they've taken it and again, in my opinion, really listened to partner feedback, customer feedback, and added things that they were hearing to only improve it. So I'm going to show you as an example. We're going to run through the slide deck real quick, and then I'll go into GP and show you what this looks like. So some tips and tricks on that homepage. When we started that session, I showed you some homepage tips and tricks that you can add. I probably caught a glimpse that there were some GP workflow tasks that we can add in there. So I've gone in and added those, but you can see if you wanted to go back and add them after the fact, you would click on that customized homepage or customize this page, click on your to-do details, and then add those in accordingly. Again, I'll go back and show you this in real time. I know I'm going through this pretty quickly. So workflow navigation lists. These are great ways to record or assist with when you've got multiple transactions as it relates to workflow. They're trying to either submit or approve. So a common question that I get asked when we implement this for users is, I don't want to have to go in and individually go into, as an example, that payables transaction entry window, hit approve, hit approve, hit approve. That's where a navigation list can really do that heavy lifting and allow you to approve multiple documents or submit multiple documents all at one time. And then finally, on our homepage, we can add in something called our Purchase Requisition Dashboard. Again, going back to my example, when I implemented this fast for folks that were using that Purchase Requisition Dashboard with workflow, this came in handy tremendously for them. It allowed their users, their requisition users, to keep it really simple. They can see, especially those common questions that that purchasing department was getting. Hey, what's the status of my requisition? I just submitted it. Well, they can see it directly within GP. So it cut down on a lot of those questions that the requisition or AP department was receiving. And then finally, workflow user delegation. We saw a little bit of this on your user preferences. This is just the way, if you're out of the office, you can indicate who that approver is going to be. And then finally, when we look at setup and maintenance for our workflow, this is a great little trick, especially when I've implemented this with customers. I always like to do this within a test company. There's reasons naturally for that. But suffice to say, once you get it all set up in your test company, now you just want to basically take all that setup and move it over to production. This feature is going to allow you to do that. So again, I'm going to spend about 1 more minute just to show you real quickly some of those things that I've showed you as it relates to workflow within my user setup here, and then we'll take some questions. So in my purchasing, so I've set up under payables transactions, I've set up a little workflow that's in place. And if you remember, I talked a little bit about leveraging those navigation lists to be able to mass approve documents within the system, especially in this case when it comes to payables. So you can see those navigation lists. Again, great way to manage workflow. They are available to all the other areas like general ledger, requisition, batch approval, all of those things. So just so you can see what it looks like in real time, I'm going to plug in a payables transaction here. And we'll also take a look at what it does to our homepage, because if you recall, I've added this to my homepage, and I'm going to be an approver in this case, so I want to show you what it would look like, that a little alert or reminder you would receive. So I'm just going to plug in my batch. Verify my distributions. Yep, looks good to me, and then I'll go ahead and submit. I'm going to close this window down, and let's take an opportunity to see what it looks like on the home page, and then what it looks like on our navigation list. So you can see here, I've got an outstanding task that's requiring my attention. So I have a payable transaction, and its approval is needed. So if I click on that, as an example, this is where I could, as the approver, go and verify that transaction and then hit approve. I don't want to do that quite yet. I'll now go take a look at my purchasing navigation list. Go into purchasing transactions not submitted. Oh, I'm sorry. Got a little click happy. I'm going to go into my purchasing transactions pending approval rate because I've submitted that transaction. It's going to show up here on my dashboard. Now, if I had multiple ones here, I'd see them all in one quick glance, and I can do a couple things. I can go and edit, so I can pull up that transaction window and make any changes if I wanted to. But I'm actually just ready to approve it right here and now. So I'll click approve. And again, if I had multiple, it would subsequently approve all those various transactions. And then I hit refresh, and I no longer have any transactions out there waiting for my approval. So that concludes my presentation on tips and tricks. Caitlin, do we have any questions at this time?
Yes, we do have a couple questions. The first question is, I like to use the My Report section, but every few days it disappears and I have to go in and set it up again. Can you tell me why this happens?
So if we're going into our home page, And these are missing?
Let's see.
Do they provide any specifics?
Yeah, uses the My Report section, but every few days it disappears, and I have to go in and set it up again.
So, and maybe we could take this one too offline. I'm happy to reach out to that appropriate user and we can do a screen share. But just as a quick tip, sometimes I see this occur where we accidentally, not saying that that occurred in this particular case. Of course, I get a little pop-up. I've seen it happen where we go and modify. So especially if it's a GP report, we've gone in and modified that GP report and changed the name or what have you, then it will disappear off this list. And then we'd have to go back and make that change. But if we can, Caitlin, maybe get that user, and happy to set some time and take a look at it with them.
Nice. Sounds good. I think we have time for a couple more questions, and then we might have to take any additional ones offline. The next question is the all-in-one view available in GP 2016 or GP 2016 R2?
So this one is GP 2018. I believe it is in 2016 R2.
Okay, and one last question I think we'll be able to cover is, will there be a corrected, can people who are not in GP approve invoices via workflow?
Yeah, that's a great question. The high-level answer is yes. There are some prerequisites that, again, maybe if we can get that user, I'm happy to have that further discussion. Essentially, some of those high-level requirements would be making sure you have something called GP Web Services running. What that allows you to do is send out notifications to folks that are non-GP users, with the caveat that that email that they receive has a hyperlink for them to be able to approve a document. So a high-level answer is yes, but there are some additional technical requirements that we would need to confirm are in place.
Okay, we're a little bit past the end of the hour, and I want to give a chance to our MC Bobby Green to kind of close out our day here. So any additional questions that do come in, we will follow up with you. So feel free to keep submitting those, or you can reach out to our team after the webinar. And Bobby, I'm going to just kind of transition the presenter over to you if that works.
It does. Just got to figure out how to show my screen here real quick. Can you see my thank you for attending slide?
We are seeing your desktop.
Well, that's not good. Let's show the other screen then.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you. So from the Columbus GP team practice, thank you so much for attending today. Tiffany, you blew my mind again, as you always do. I'm looking for tip number 30 because I like even numbers and my OCD kicked in when I saw 29. So I'm going to hit you up after this. So just want to take just a moment to thank our sponsors, Avid Exchange, Avalara, K-Commerce, SalesPad, E1, Binary Stream, and HighJump. Thank you very much for your time and for helping to support this event. Like to remind everybody that if you attended 2 or more sessions today, you're entered in our giveaway. We're going to be giving away a free attendees pass to the GPUG User Summit in Orlando, Florida. Very nice place to be in October. Doesn't pay for the airfare, the driving, or the hotel, but it does get you into the events. So if you've signed up for those sessions, that's great. That it's really good news for you guys. If you could, please make sure that you complete the evaluations, because that's how we know that you completed attending it. And then the drawing will be conducted tomorrow, and the winner will be notified via email and announced on our Twitter account tomorrow. Save the date if you would. We're going to have some additional presenters give a Let's Learn live performance on site at the Orlando during the UG Summit, and more details will come pretty soon. And then finally, last time, thank you so much for attending. We appreciate your time. If you have any additional questions, Tiffany will be capturing those out of the question box and getting back to you with answers. So thank you for your time. Have a great day.